Emotion, the root of it is motion, and it has the same root as motivation. So whether we're tracking the state of mind, not just at the purely cognitive analytical Spock-like level, right? We're not a bunch of termites bumping into each other. We're passionate monkeys. We're giant monkeys who are very vulnerable to, speaking of vulnerable, it's very easy to make us feel afraid or angry.
Today's discussion is with Rick Hanson, who is a psychologist. He's a senior fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. And he's also the New York Times best-selling author of 7 books, including his most recent one, which is called Making Great Relationships: Simple Practices for Solving Conflicts, Building Connection, and Fostering Love. Today's conversation is a very fascinating one and also wide-ranging. As most of you know, I'm working on a new book exploring leadership and vulnerability, which is coming out towards the second half of 2023. So some of the themes that we talk about today are related to vulnerability and especially leadership. We look at the role that vulnerability plays in professional relationships, the causes of stress and anxiety, and what actually happens biologically in your body when you experience these things, how to control negative feelings and emotions when they arise, and recognizing and challenging the assumptions that we have of others and of ourselves. If you want to support the show, then please consider subscribing to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, where you will get a bonus episode each week, including one with Rick, where he talks about how to fight fair, how to resolve conflict, and the importance of taking the higher road. If you are watching on YouTube, you can also support the show just by subscribing to the channel, which is totally free. When you do subscribe on Apple, you will get a new bonus episode each week, ad-free listening, and early access to new episodes so that you can listen to them before everyone else. Thanks for considering to support the show. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leading the Future of Work. My guest today, Rick Hanson. He's a psychologist, senior fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, and New York Times bestselling author of 7 books, including his most recent one, just about to come out, called Making Great Relationships: Simple Practices for Solving Conflicts, Building Connection, and Fostering Love, coming out January 2023. Rick, thank you for joining me.
Jacob, I'm glad to be here. This is exciting. I'm glad about it.
Yeah, I have so many questions for you. So I mentioned before we hit record that I was working on a new book on leadership and vulnerability, which is going to come out towards the end of next year. So I thought that could be an interesting place for us to start, is around vulnerability. And maybe just really broadly speaking, what are your general thoughts on vulnerability and how that plays into creating relationships? Is that important? Is that something that you've been seeing and writing about and researching?
If we think about vulnerability as being exposed to harm, there doesn't mean we're yet harmed. It just means there's a potential for harm. We've kind of opened the gates. We've lowered our guard. We're exposed. There's certain situations in life and in business where you should not be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
You should not expose yourself.
What would be an example of those, by the way?
Shields up, Scotty. For example, a situation where someone is just kind of, you could just tell they're a colleague or a boss or a competitor who's looking for any chink in your armor to make you look bad, tear you down. And you just realize, oh, okay, or you're in a formal setting where it's just not appropriate to spill your guts on the table and to go into a level of self-disclosure and your personal history that just isn't appropriate and, doesn't make you look good. There's a place for being guarded, for being careful. I think what's Maya Angelou's line, when people show you who they are the first time, believe them. So you start to realize, no, I'm just not going to expose certain things to you, let's say. So with that caveat then, whether it's in formal settings of business or in more personal relationships, when we expose ourselves to harm, we also expose ourselves to lots and lots of help, lots of benefit, and we send a signal to other people that they can step out of the fight. They can lower their guard a little bit, and maybe we can do this together. So my vulnerability is an invitation to you to become one step more vulnerable yourself. And then we kind of mutually take steps that match each other in our growing openness and accessibility. That's one. Second, I think it's important to distinguish between external and internal vulnerability. So I'm a longtime psychotherapist and longtime business person. I have a background in corporate consulting, and also I've owned and managed small businesses. I'm unemployable because I've just run my own business.
We're in the same boat.
Okay, good. Anyway, we can be externally somewhat guarded, careful, let's say, while being internally open to all of who we are right then and there, to all the ways we feel, including ways we feel that might be soft or sad or young or unfulfilled yearnings of the heart. We can be vulnerable to ourselves, which is full of value. Wow, it's one of the most powerful factors of positive mental health, and it's one of the most powerful factors of negative mental health when it's not present, lacking that internal vulnerability.
Today's episode of Leading the Future of Work is brought to you by, the actual future of work. That's right, we found it, everyone. It turns out that Cornerstone just went and built it. With their new talent experience platform, you can combine best-in-class learning, growth-centric talent capabilities, and AI to turn your talent leaders into champions of limitless potential. Go learn more at csod.com. Again, that's csod.com. So how does that work? I mean, the external piece, I think a lot of people are familiar with because it's based on an action, like what you say or what you do. The internal vulnerability, though, you're not talking about it with anybody. Is this just kind of like your internal voice and your internal dialogue?
Okay. So first part, I also realized that external vulnerability, even in business settings, includes I'm willing to be affected by you. And that's especially important if you come into it, as I do, as a tall white dude, tall white old dude, to really, with people who are not advantaged like I am in various ways, to be genuinely, sincerely open to being affected by them, to letting their story land, to letting their experience land. I mean, that's a very fundamental kind of vulnerability. It's an openness to others. Okay. Internal vulnerability, self-awareness. And a key to that is certainly body awareness. When people say, like I did, I was numb from the neck down when I entered adulthood because of my unhappy, but not traumatic, but still unhappy childhood. So waking down, not just waking up, is really useful. Getting in touch with your body. People who say, I don't know what I feel. All right, just start with sensations. Are you aware of the sensations of breathing?
Yeah.
As the air flows in and flows out, your chest rises and falls. That's a really fast way into greater self-awareness, including of your underlying gut feelings, your emotions. So that's a thing. And another is just being able to tolerate. Can you tolerate distress?
Yeah.
Can you tolerate discomfort? Can you stand your feelings? And then you can grow in how to tolerate. I mean, I could name 3 or 4 things to make you more internally resilient. We focus a lot on external resilience. Yeah. What about being internally resilient to the stuff bubbling up?
Yeah, I think that's also very important. And there have been a few times where I went to go see a therapist to try to understand some of these themes. And as I mentioned, I'm working on a book on vulnerability, so I'm trying to learn as much of this as I can. And I remember a therapist had me do some exercises to try to understand and talk about feelings. And she said, okay, 3 times a day, I want you to just stop and do a check-in with yourself and write down how you're feeling. And so I did this for a little while, and then we got together again. And she said, okay, read me some of your check-ins. And I noticed that all the check-ins that I would read back to her were, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling stressed, I'm okay, and they were all these kind of general terms. And she said to me, she's like, Where are the feelings here? Where are the emotions? Those aren't, good is not an emotion. Good is not a feeling. Stress can be something that you use for anything. And she said, one of the things that you struggle with is you have a hard time trying to identify and talk about emotions and feelings. And she gave me a link to, I think it was Gloria Wilcox, the feelings wheel. And I looked at that feelings wheel and I'm like, oh my God, there's so many feelings that you can use to talk about. And they're not foreign words, but you just don't use them. And so I looked at that, and then I started doing check-ins after that. And I started saying things like, I feel proud, I feel accomplished, I feel disappointed, I feel let down. And I became more comfortable recognizing those feelings. Part of me wonders if inside of organizations, we really struggle, and even just in our general lives, to struggle identifying feelings and talking about them. Do you find that that's the case for a lot of people?
I think it is, and to generalize, especially for a lot of men.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just like you said, I was just looking up the definition of KPI earlier today, and key performance indicator. And just like in business, you want to get granular feedback.
Yeah.
Internally, emotions are profoundly useful, evolved for survival purposes, including in relationships with others in our hunter-gatherer bands, that provide highly granular feedback. So being able to differentiate among them is really important. What's the difference between feeling uneasy, nervous, worried, fearful, phobic, panicky, or terrorized? There's differences. What's the difference between feeling exasperated, annoyed, miffed, irritated, mad, angry, enraged, furious? Right? These are useful distinctions, and being able to name them to yourself also helps you identify them more granularly in others, which is really useful, whether it's your 4-year-old or your 64-year-old boss who's acting like a 4-year-old. I don't know. This is really helpful. Differentiation, granularity, clarity, distinctions are really useful. It's not an academic exercise.
Why is
really
this
useful?
Why is this important in a business setting? I feel like a lot of people might be thinking, well, yeah, I get it. It's great for my spouse, my significant other, my parents, my friends. Why do I need to know or care about this stuff inside of an organization when it comes to feelings, emotions, vulnerability? What does that matter?
Yeah, emotions are, emotion, the root of it is motion, and it has the same root as motivation. So whether we're tracking the state of mind, not just at the purely cognitive analytical Spock-like level, right? We're not a bunch of termites bumping into each other. We're passionate monkeys. We're giant monkeys who are very vulnerable to being vulnerable. It's very easy to make us feel afraid or angry. And taking that into account with our colleagues, with our bosses, with the people who report to us, and with our peers, and with our customers of various kinds, what are they feeling? It's very straightforward. So it's extremely useful to track, were they irritated with you? For example, let's say something happens and you see this look crossing over your supervisor's, your boss's, your manager's face. What's going on there? Did they feel disrespected by you? Were they just puzzled? Were they thinking about their kids' struggle at school and just has nothing to do with you? Is it that they are just feeling kind of like let down yet again by you? What's going on? It's detail.
Yeah.
Details are informative. Wouldn't you want to know? You go to a doctor and you're just not feeling good. You don't want the doctor to say, "Oh yeah, you're just not feeling good. We have this generic treatment for not feeling good." You'd be like, "Wait, what is it? Is it my pancreas? Is it my, testosterone levels are dropping as I age? What's the deal here?" You'd want to know with specificity.
Yeah, the context, it seems like, matters quite a bit. And I know there's a theory in psychology, I think it's fundamental attribution error.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think you talk about it in your book as well, right? It's this idea that when something isn't going well, and I think the analogy a lot of psychologists use is if you're sitting in a restaurant, or this is at least the story I heard, if you're sitting in a restaurant and your waiter comes over and they accidentally spill the soup on you, they're having a bad day, they're short, they're snappy, and you leave the restaurant and you immediately think, man, that person was such a insert expletive here, right? Bleep, 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 right? You go crazy. But you don't think in terms of, well, maybe that person's having a bad day. Maybe their spouse just left them. Maybe their family member just passed away. And so
Yeah.
I guess the theory is we oftentimes attribute how people act to their behavior, their personality, who they are as a person, instead of the situation. And more often than not, it's usually the situation and not who they are as a person.
Yeah. One of that's really great. You great summary of that. Exactly right. If a summary version of it that I heard, just to kind of riff with you here, is that when good things happen to us, we tend to think that global qualities in us are the source. When bad things happen to us, we tend to think of it as bad fortune, just bad luck. When good things happen to other people, we tend to think of it as their good luck. And when bad things happen to them, we tend to think of it as their fault,
Oh,
right?
that's
So that's
interesting.
that different. That's another way of summarizing it. Yeah. One thing about it too, and I want to ask you, Jacob, like in a way, in this podcast, you're listening for a living,
Yes.
and I too, as a therapist, have listened for a living. What helps people learn to listen? In a
Yeah.
sense, because when you listen, you do start to recognize granularity or details in the state of being of other people. What helps us actually just slow down and receive, including in the fast-paced business world?
What helps us slow down and receive?
Yeah, and listen. Yeah.
Um, that's a good question. I feel like that's such a hard thing to do now because we're so distracted. We have technology everywhere. We're not patient. And so as far as what helps us slow down, oh man, that's a good question. I mean, I know for me, what has been helpful is I started doing 10-minute meditations. I started doing daily gratitudes at
Yeah.
night. My wife and I, each night before we go to bed, we talk about how was your day? How are you feeling? And that's kind of how we end our night. So I think being a little bit more reflective and taking time and space to talk about ourselves and how we're feeling and how we're doing has been very, very helpful, especially
Yeah.
during tough situations. It's kind of like take a step back, let's reflect, let's talk about it instead of just go, go, go. So it's kind of like hitting pause at certain times during the day. That to me personally has just been very helpful.
That's great. Yeah. For me, there's a kind of almost humility in it, in a healthy sense,
Yeah.
that basically says, I don't know everything. I'm interested in being influenced by you or affected by you. What do you know that I don't know? For example, that's one part. Another is, I don't know. I'm bored by myself. What I mean is, I know my personality. I know what I think about stuff. I don't know what you think about stuff.
Yeah.
And so to be interested I think one thing that has, for me, really been important is to get better at helping yourself be interested in things and sustaining interest.
How do you make that shift? Is there a way to conquer that fundamental attribution error? Like, how do we move away from assuming that it's a person's character flaw or personality to think about the situation? Is it as simple as just us asking, like, hey, maybe something's going on? Because I feel like we're very quick to jump. You're this, you're that. How do you stop that?
Yeah. Well, understanding it, just like you explained to people, is really helpful. I think a second is to appreciate that other people are like you. They're complicated messes they too have an inner committee, an inner village, an inner zoo that's pulling them in different directions. So just like you, they're pulled in different directions by multiple motives and often do stuff on impulse alone or out of emotional reactivity. And a lot of it, just like you, so much of what we each do, other people are bit players in our personal drama. They kind of move through our life. We're not immensely reacting to them. We're a lot reacting to the last interaction we had or that argument with our wife going out the door, our partner. So I think that's really helpful. And then last, I think just leading with respect. It's not just the absence of bias or the absence of presumptions about other people. It's presuming good intention or looking for the good intention underneath it all. And I think of some old-fashioned words, patience, respect, really are useful, including in an increasingly multicultural business environment and world, is to just patience, slow it down. Okay, man, you got to wait 40 seconds for the light to change. Can you just freaking chill? Or, oh, wow, maybe I can't, I'm getting only one bar in my cell. I got to wait 15 minutes till we, get out of this kind of shadow area here. Wow, 15 minutes. Think how long it used to take people to send a letter to someone on the other side of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, my
patience
parents,
and then respect.
Yeah, my parents used to live apart for several years. My mom was in Australia, which is where I was born, and my dad was in LA or in California pursuing the American dream because I have immigrant parents. They came from Russia in the late 70s, early 80s. So there was a period where they spent years not seeing each other, and they would send letters to each other back and forth. It takes who knows how long for that letter to get there. Today, you just Skype message somebody. It's nuts.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. Exactly.
So I'm also really curious, there's a lot of talk about stress, anxiety, well-being, mental health lately. Where does stress and anxiety actually come from, and what happens in the body? Does it create a certain chemical? Is it different for everybody as far as what causes stress and anxiety? Because we talk about it a lot, but I'm wondering how many people actually know what's going on with you when you feel stressed or anxious, or what triggers it? What's going on physically with you?
So this is a big topic, and I'm going to really try to soundbite it. And I'm really inviting you, Jacob, to segment me, cut me off, because you could push play here, and I could give a very condensed, useful, practical 10-minute talk that would just probably drive you and half your listeners crazy. So I try not to do that. The short version is, so we're big animals, and like other animals, we deal with changing conditions, and we have needs, right? So life is changing, waves keep coming, we have to respond to them. There are stressors, there are challenges, but that does not inherently mean that we must feel stressed. So that's like big idea number one.
Okay.
And we'll be coming back to it. And so the key question is, what helps us in a dynamic 10, 12 or more hour a day business environment, juggling family, dealing with other people? What helps us deal with challenges without getting stressed by them? So here's a key point. The essential ingredient of stress is negative emotion.
Yeah.
Many people are dealing with challenges with enthusiasm. I go rock climbing less than I used to, but there I am in a very hazardous environment. Safety's challenged. There's a little bit of pressure around the edges, but I'm still having a tremendous time.
Yeah.
I'm having the time of my life because there are factors that help me deal with that challenge without getting stressed about it. Think about people who love the startup world in business in a way that would freak out a lot of other people who look for that stability of a paycheck, but the lack of a safety net and the high stakes is a thrill for a lot of people. They're They're having a great time. Think of a surgeon dealing with life and death decisions that have to be made extremely quickly, with on a scale of less than a millimeter
Yeah.
of their blade. They're not stressed by it. So it's negative emotion. So managing negative emotion and helping yourself deal with challenges without negative emotion is the key. It's the heart of the matter. It's the heart of the matter. Now, managing negative emotion does not mean suppressing it, because it bubbles back up again.
Yeah.
The brain is not like a flush toilet. It's more like a septic tank. What we push down stays there, and eventually it stinks and comes back up. So, it's important to keep. I could name 10 things. Maybe I'll name one, but there are things we can do to face challenges with less negative emotion about them. Like, for example, reminding yourself that you're capable of meeting the challenge when that's factually true. Reminding yourself that you're okay in the present, and giving yourself the feeling of reassurance. That's really helpful. Connecting with other people in challenging environments is really useful for reducing negative emotion and promoting positive emotions. Replacing negative emotions with positive emotions. Yes, maybe there's been a frustration, and also, not denying the frustration, you can be grateful for 5 other things. Right?
Yeah.
Your boss has criticized you. It's a drag. Maybe it's unfair, and your wife loves you. Your partner loves you. You have friends. You're part of a softball team. You're going to go get a beer later and watch sports. It's okay. It's really important. Really important. So you want a little biology?
Yeah.
Might
No,
be kinda
I'm
interesting for
really
people.
interested in actually what's going on
Yeah.
in the brain or the body.
Yeah. So big idea number 1, you can have challenges without getting stressed. You can have stressors without getting stressed. Big idea number 2, the key is emotion. Getting all activated with negative emotion, that's stress. Getting all activated with positive emotion, that's enthusiasm.
Yeah.
That's peak performance. Okay. Third big idea, the amygdala hijack. In other words, basically, as information flows into us about the world, including let's say, a comment from your boss or an email from an irate customer.
We've all been in both those
That,
situations.
yeah. Or your partner calls you, in the way you're about to walk in the front door, and they said, "You remember? Did you get the this and that?" And you're like, "Oh crud, I forgot." They're going to hate me again. Right? So. And here I am back in my childhood with my parents lambasting me because I dropped the ball yet again, something.
Yeah.
Okay. So when that information comes in, it goes through 2 pathways in your brain. One pathway goes whoop right to these subcortical regions that emerged around 200 million years ago. They're ancient, from the early mammals, including the amygdala. We have 2 of which in the brain, which is like a little alarm bell. It's constantly tracking what's happening, and it especially is designed to react to negatives. Okay, so negative feedback, obstruction to getting your goals fulfilled, issues with other people, and then the amygdala, bam, sends a signal really quickly that then goes down two paths. One path goes into the hormonal system through the hypothalamus and then the pituitary glands, and now 2 seconds later you're feeling adrenaline and cortisol.
Yeah.
And the other path, the other signal from the amygdala goes into the nervous system, typically with what's called the sympathetic nervous system, which then makes your heart beat faster, your pupils dilate to take in more information, fight or flight. Okay. All that happens incredibly quickly. Meanwhile, there's a slower information highway that goes to more modern, evolved prefrontal cortical regions behind the forehead that are the seat of executive judgment, conceptualizing, long-term planning, and regulating your emotions. All right. The problem is the amygdala gets a little head start, a second or 2 head start. And it initiates this stress response quickly. And also it biases how the prefrontal cortex is going to now interpret events. Right? So that's a lot of the physiology of it. And the takeaway from that is kind of twofold. In the moment, slow yourself down, slow your roll so that your prefrontal cortex can catch up. Classic advice from I don't know if your grandmother gave you this advice or something, but count to 10, sweetie, before you say anything. I have a friend who uses the acronym WAIT, WAIT, WAIT. Why am I talking? With my wife and my family, I try to remind myself, Rick, slow it down, pause and pause. So that's one huge takeaway.
How long of a pause are we talking here, by the way? So let's say, for example, I'm inside of
3 seconds.
Okay. So if let's say I'm in a stressful situation, I'm in a meeting, my boss comes to me, Jacob, you didn't do this, blah, 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 kind of going off on me. You just kind of take a couple seconds and then wait to kind of formulate a response before you're just jumping in, F you, no, blah, 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 kind of back and forth arguing.
Yeah, often it's sort of like just a couple seconds really will help you. Now, if you buy yourself 5 seconds or 10 seconds, 10 seconds is a long time in a meeting between something happening and you responding. That has all kinds of benefits. For one, it helps other people slow down. I'm a longtime couples counselor too, and so much of what goes wrong in couples conflicts, but you could see it also in a work setting, is that it's rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat.
Yeah. Yep.
They just go off on each other. It's nuclear reaction. And any one of the two slows it down, that's good for both of you. Also, when you slow it down, you're both able to buy yourself, half a breath so that you can start to think clearly. What should I do? What are my real priorities here? I'm willing to lose a battle to win the war. Is this really the time at the end of the day, or is this really the time just before we go get some food because we're all starving after this long meeting we've been in to really get into it? And also you can calm your body. One of the fastest way to calm your body is exhale. A lot of times when we're uptight and tense, we hold our breath.
Yep.
And technically, when we inhale, the heart rate speeds up, and the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, that's what it's called, gets engaged, and that's the branch that's energizing, but also moves into fighting and fleeing. The parasympathetic branch is involved with exhaling, during which time your heart rate is slowing and your body is calming. Mm-hmm. So if you deliberately just make yourself exhale slowly once or twice, no one needs to notice it. No one needs to notice it. It's kind of secret. That's really useful. And then I'll tell you another quick hack on your brain really fast is to really try to remember someone who cares about you, or the feeling of being with your dog, your partner, your grandmother when you were a kid, your buddies you do something with. As soon as we bring in the felt sense of being with others who care about us, that's a primal signal. Think about the Stone Age tribes. Incredibly important to feel like you were part of the group. They had your back.
Yeah.
They were going to come and get you. You were part of the team, because exile was a death sentence back in the Stone Age. No one could survive on their own. You needed to be part of the band. So just bring it to mind. What's it feel like? Or who do you love? Who do you care about? Either way, there's that sense of heartfelt relatedness. Really, studies show really effectively lowers emotional reactivity.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I like that you bring up the point that it's not about removing or suppressing negative emotion. It's understanding how to deal with it when it comes up. And it seems like the best thing that you can do is to slow down, is to do some of the things, whether it's thinking about spending time with your dog or gratitudes, kind of just changing your perspective and mindset a little bit in those types of situations.
Yeah, technically, the amygdala, the alarm bell, has receptors for oxytocin on it. Oxytocin, neurochemical. Women have more oxytocin than men do, but men have oxytocin as well. And certainly in the brain, those receptors are inhibitory. What it means is that as you experience positive relationship, that increases oxytocin activity in your brain, which calms down the alarm bell. It inhibits the amygdala.
Interesting.
All right. See, that's one of multiple little mechanisms whereby this works.
Cornerstone is so confident their new talent experience platform is the future of work that you can actually seamlessly integrate into their biggest competitors. Learn how to unlock the limitless potential of your workforce at csod.com. That's csod.com. So many themes that you talk about in the book, and I know we're already like halfway through our interview. So I'm going to pick a couple that I thought were particularly interesting. One of them was around this idea of scripts, schemas, and stereotypes. I think you talked about rewriting the script in one different part of the book. And we have a lot of scripts and stereotypes and schemas for things. And I guess the way that I understand it is a schema is your blueprint for a situation. A stereotype is your heuristic, your shortcut of what to do in a situation. Stereotype is your shortcut for a person. And a script, I guess, is how you feel you need to actually play out or how you actually need to behave. What's the danger with these? Because it seems like sometimes they serve us well, right? So knowing how to act in a certain environment, knowing what you can say or not say, but it seems like sometimes these things can also be detrimental. So can you share, when are these things a bad idea and what do you do?
Great. So they're basically all models of the world, including models of yourself and models of how you interact with the world. And in the brain, and you can see this in evolutionary history as well, there's a tension between being, on the one hand, fast but rigid. A lizard, a fly, they're very quick, but they're rigid. While, on the other hand, being flexible but slow. And so there's a balance there. It's efficient to have these models of yourself and other people so that you don't have to keep figuring it out for anew every single time. Think of all the things we do while driving. We have all these automatic subroutines, changing lanes, letting someone go ahead, not letting somebody cut you off, moving into a lane when you have to. We know how to do these things, so we don't have to reinvent them every time. There's a place for that, but we can become trapped by them. So one of the first things I want to underline here is it's a little bit like what I said earlier about interest or respect. This is more like a personal quality that is worth paying attention to and cultivating, which is a sense of your own autonomy, that you are your own master. You are the captain of your own ship. You are the author of your own screenplay. And we tend to think about autonomy in the business world, externally directed, like, I'm not going to let them push me around. All right. But what about all the forces inside your own mind that have been pushing you around since you were 10 years old? And are still doing the same stuff today. So it's the puppet masters inside your head. So I think there's a place for people to have a kind of attitude of, wait a second here. I don't want to be controlled by those old scripts, those old assumptions, and I want to be a learner. I want to be someone who grows and learns, and rather than someone who's just sort of stuck in the past. I find that really helpful. I find it also really helpful to realize that other people are often trying to cast you into their movie. They've got a script and they want you to play that role. And for example, they relate by quarreling. They connect by bickering. And they're always looking to bicker. They want to argue about something. And because that's how they connect. Maybe that's how they learned in their culture, maybe in their family. And maybe you just don't want to do that. It's tiring. It's frustrating. It never goes anywhere. It's emotionally unpleasant. So you start thinking, I'm going to step out of that script. Or you have a teenager, who keeps trying to suck you into a certain script as a parent. that you're the evil dad or mom or something, and you just keep trying to find a way to get out of that script. So it's really useful to think about even a typical argument, like my wife and I. We've been married 40 years.
Wow.
We drive. So I usually am the driver. She has poor depth perception. She also doesn't have a lot of background in driving. I grew up in LA. I've driven 1,000,000 miles on heavy traffic. I'm calm. She's more anxious by temperament. So still, she's constantly telling me how to drive. Slow down. Did you see this? Watch out for that. And I'm like, honey, I got it. Plus, it's kind of annoying. And a lot of what we do is try to stay out of a familiar script like that, And one takeaway, honestly, for me is to realize first that even though other people are trying to suck me into a certain role, in my own mind, I can be free. Maybe externally, I need to kind of put up with it. I need to, go along to get along, at least in that situation. But deep down inside, I don't have to buy into it. That's useful. Another is to just disrupt the script.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you, because I feel like a lot of people fall into a script at work as far as the role that they play on a team. Oh, that's Jacob. He's always late, or he never has the good ideas, or that's Bob the manager, or Lisa the executive. She's like a robot. And we get these kind of we create characters and stories and attributes, and I don't know. Sometimes it seems like we create things that aren't there, or we feel like we get into this pattern and we get stuck with it. So how do you break that, especially if it's for you and you are in somebody else's movie and you don't want to be, like, you get a reputation of, I don't have the good ideas. I'm not the fun person, the cool colleague who wants to go out and party. How do you get out of that stuff?
That's great. Well, to thine own self be true. I mean, that's obviously where we have to start. We got to, who are you? What kind of a person are you? Like, I'm now the CEO of a nonprofit that's growing quite rapidly to be something big. And first, I'm not used to the nonprofit world because I was a sole proprietor and small business owner forever, and I'm used to feeling like the knife's at my neck, and I got to perform every day, and people got to produce tangible results every day. Nonprofit world so much just feels different from that culturally, and so I'm with people who come out of that world. I'm not going to not be who I am. And also, we have a limited we're like a startup nonprofit. We have limited funding to get going, and we need to put points on the board, right? We need to accomplish tangible things. So you got to be true to yourself. While also, I think it's helpful to be really open to understanding what's it like for others to be with you, and to be that person who's willing to stretch and grow and be on the learning team. Right. The most important. I saw a guy. I worked with a woman 1,000,000 years ago, and her she was in a marriage with a real hard charging Type A venture capital biz kind of guy, and he had on the license plate, or the bumper rather, of his $1 million Range Rover. He who dies with the most toys wins. And I thought, wow, I don't know. And yeah, they got a divorce soon after. But,
Oh, wow.
I think the person who learns the most wins.
Yeah.
The person who grows the most, the person who heals the most, who awakens the most wins. And to be motivated to be on that learning team. So I think that part. Second, if I could say one more thing too, is to kind of shake it up. For me, there's no replacement for action. And if there's correction to put in that's not going to be inauthentic, but is in your range, what's that correction? And to actually say, let's say you're someone, you used yourself as examples. I think they were made up, right? But totally made up. But let's say you're someone who's routinely late. Well, don't be routinely late. blow their mind. Yeah. Maybe you're someone who tends to be sort of the person in the room who's always looking for the reason why not, who always kind of comes from doubt or skepticism. Maybe deliberately wait for others to express doubts and skepticism and identified problems, and be the person who leads with what you value or appreciate or what you think is good about another person's output or their ideas. Shake up your script. And often these little changes can produce really pretty sweeping results.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode with Rick Hanson. If you want to support the show, you can do so by subscribing on Apple Podcasts. And when you subscribe, you will get a bonus episode with Rick where he talks about how to fight fair, how to resolve conflict, and the importance of taking the higher road. You'll get a bonus episode each week from one of my amazing guests, early access to new episodes, and ad-free listening. So thank you very much for considering to subscribe. You can also support the show on YouTube by subscribing to the YouTube channel. It's totally free. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.